In this video, we're going to be talking about the nurture phase of the CORE4MULA program. So nurture is really the next step in the process. After we've captured a lead, we then need to find a way to develop a relationship. And because so many decisions that potential clients have are based around trust and relationship and things like that, we want to find a way to help advisors through this process, right? Yep. So if you're initially talking to somebody at an event, or you get somebody onto your email list, the next step in the process is to move them toward some sort of decision. It might be after you've spoken to them on the phone. It might be to try to get them on the phone. That is the nurture process. There are distinctively two different pieces of nurture. There's that short-term nurture, which is to try to get somebody to take quick action.
Yeah.
Then there's a longer-term nurture, and these are going out for two very different reasons.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about the differences there with the two different audiences?
So I think a lot of times we kind of lump this all into one, and we've really separated it because we think that there's a difference between somebody who's going to take action in the first 3 weeks, first 21 days, that they've gotten on your list, that they've interacted with you, and somebody who's not. Mm-hmm. And so we look at this and say, the best time for someone to take another action after they've grabbed a lead magnet or met you at an event or gone to a seminar, etc., is the next day, right? The sooner they are to that interaction, the more likely they are to take another action.
It has to do with their frame of mind, their awareness of what you are offering them.
Yep. Yeah. And so the short-term nurture is intense. It is more of a rapid-fire, multi-channel way of reaching out to somebody, because we know this is a hot lead. We know that this person is very likely to take an action. And so what that means is that we're going to take more action towards them. Mm-hmm. Now we have less of a relationship, and so we recognize we have to do more work in that time frame.
And again, this is maybe getting somebody to take a quick action that's not necessarily handing over their life savings to Correct. Be managed, but it's really the first conversation with you, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And this for a lot of advisors, they're using this as a qualification tool. Mm-hmm. Is rather than, hey, come sit down in my office for an hour. We've all done this where you've sat down with somebody for an hour and there was no value for you in that conversation, right? Let's do a 15-minute phone call, a 5-minute phone call, and make sure this prospect is a good prospect before we take them to the next step. And so short-term nurture is, what is it that we need to do to get them into your existing process so that we can ultimately move them down the path of becoming a client?
Now, we'll talk a little bit about the long term, but I want to jump back to something that we were talking about earlier when we were talking about capture.
Okay.
Because I think this is an important piece of the puzzle. When any business advisors we talk to all the time tell us this, right? They are on to the next opportunity, on to the next lead constantly. And so what they do is they kind of toss over their shoulder and say, well, forget that person. That's not somebody that I'm gonna be able to help or do business with, or isn't going to be a good fit for me. And that's where we see so much missed opportunity, so much waste.
Yeah. So
can you talk a little bit about sort of how these numbers flesh out, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to rectify that with a longer term.
So typically what we see is let's say that we get 100 people in the door, okay? Maybe 10 of those will be qualified. Mm-hmm. And of those 10, maybe only one is ready to take an action in the next 30 days, right? Or the next 60 days, or even the next 90 days. Yeah. But these other 9, they're still qualified leads. We've still said, hey, this person is qualified. I still want to talk to them. And I think rather than just saying, look, let's discard them, let's ignore them, we want to make sure that action is being taken around these people. And I think oftentimes the reason that we discard them is because we're saying it's too much work to get them to the point where they're ready for that next conversation. Mm-hmm. I don't have the 2 years to wait because you're 57 now for you to become 59.
Yeah.
Right? The system changes all that. because it's now not taking up your time for them to continue building a relationship with you. And so we say, look, those 10 leads, all 10 are qualified, and the more likely we are to get a sale out of that, the better the economics are.
Yeah.
And so if I'm spending, let's say, $500, and what I get is I get one sale in the first 30 days, well, my cost to acquire clients is $500. And a lot of people are really happy with that. And they say, hey, you know what? The economics here are fantastic. Well, what happens if 6 months, 9 months, a year later, we acquire a second client from that same list? Well, now my acquisition cost is $250. I don't know about you, but that seems a lot better than $500.
Sure, absolutely.
Right? 50% better, in fact. Right? And let's say then 2 years later, we acquire a third and a fourth. Well, now we're at 125 a lead or a converted sale, right? The numbers get compounded into better and better and better. And more importantly, you now have a system that's harvesting leads for you, and you're not having to continually fill that new pipeline because the pipeline's already full.
So you've spent that money, or you've spent that time up front, and you're benefiting from that initial outlay.
Absolutely.
On an ongoing basis down the road.
I was talking to a guy not too long ago who said he had been nurturing a client for 5 years before they got to the point where they were ready to hand over $3 million for assets under management. And I look at this and I'm saying, he could have discarded that. But that payday, while 5 years in the making, is still great money. And the cost to acquire that client is functionally zero. Right? Because it's all been spent. It's all already been accounted for. And now it's just gravy. So if we look at this and say, look, I'm able to harvest up to 9 more sales from this list of 10. And that list of 10's already been paid for by the first one. Why are we ignoring these people? We know that they're qualified. We know that they're a good fit. Let's go after them.
And so the difference here between the short-term nurture, which is to get somebody to take an action, and the long-term nurture, which is really just staying in front of them, reminding them that you exist and that you have a solution to a need that they have either now or will have in the future. That's really, the two different ways that we approach nurture in this phase of the core formula program.
And I would say on top of that, there's also this trust factor, right? I don't know any advisor who's ever said, you know what, I met a guy last night and today he's giving me $10 million for assets.
Sounds kind of a sweet deal, but I can't imagine that happening.
That's just not reality. The question is, well, if you've got someone who's considering giving you $10 million, how much trust needs to be built? And how are we building that trust? And rather than saying, oh, well, I'm going to see them over and over and over, I'm going to hope that something happens, I want to put you in the driver's seat. I want to drive the car rather than just hope somehow we pass.
So there you go. There's nurture as part of the core formula program. In our next video, we're going to be covering the follow phase of core formula.